The first time the Calaxy observed Marshal Lorne laugh during a disaster, they thought he was malfunctioning. It happened aboard the diplomatic vessel Yanari, a silver leviathan drifting calmly in orbit above Ceres. The delegation from Earth was 3 days into a month-long cultural exchange with the Calaxy, a species known for their rigid logic and complete lack of what humans called emotional leakage. They didn't blink. They didn't sigh. They certainly didn't laugh. Marshall, a mission systems engineer selected for his technical expertise and calm under pressure, had just finished showing Representative Zelth the Earth Standard Pressure Regulation System, essentially a glorified, oversized air pump, when the entire corridor jolted. An alarm blared, followed by a groan through the walls like the ship itself was reconsidering its life choices. Marshall was thrown against the wall, cracking his elbow hard enough to make him curse. Zelth stumbled but remained upright, thanks to its low center of gravity and a body that resembled a walking obelisk made of botanical glass. "Containment breaching in Deck C4, barked the ship's AI through the intercom. "Critical coolant line rupture. Internal pressure destabilizing. Evacuate immediately." "Evacuation protocols activated," Zelth announced. Marshall shoved off the wall, cradling his arm. "You got a med station nearby?" Zelth tilted toward him. "You appear damaged yet remain." Amused, Marshall blinked, then realized he was laughing short bursts, more like expelled breath than actual amusement. "Oh yeah, sorry, just..." Reflex. "There is nothing humorous about the current situation." "Yeah, no kidding," Marshall muttered, still chuckling between breaths as he grabbed a handhold and began pulling himself toward the emergency shaft. Zelth followed. "Are you cognitively compromised?" "No, this is just..." "How we do it?" The rupture was worse than expected. By the time they reached Deck C4, coolant vapor had turned the corridor into a foggy, freezing nightmare. 2 Calaxy engineers were trying to seal the breach, their movements slow and careful, while the ship's AI repeated evacuation orders. Marshall scanned the readouts. "You've got 15 minutes before the whole deck's uninhabitable." Zelth observed him closely. "You are laughing again." "Force of habit," Marshall said, pulling a thermal wrap from the wall and wrapping his arm. "I do this when things go sideways. Keeps me from screaming." The coolant leak was eventually sealed, but not before Marshall's arm stiffened up and he lost sensation in 2 fingers. A scan in the infirmary confirmed a hairline fracture near the elbow and mild frostbite on his fingertips. Zelth stood beside him silently during the entire procedure. Once the medics cleared out, Zelth finally asked, "Was the laughter a coping mechanism?" Marshall nodded. "Pretty much." Zelth's head tilted. "Explain." Marshall sat up and flexed his fingers. "You ever try not to panic when you know things are getting bad?" "I do not panic." "Well, humans do. The laugh isn't because we think it's funny, it's like the pressure valve on a steam pot, keeps us from blowing up inside." Zelth blinked slowly. "Fascinating. You emit a sound associated with enjoyment during moments of distress to self-regulate." "Yeah, weird, right? Dangerous. Only if you don't understand it." What Marshall didn't know was that Zelth had already submitted a report to the Calaxy Behavioral Observation Unit. 2 days later, Marshall was invited to a psychological evaluation not for his own benefit, but to demonstrate this phenomenon to the Calaxy Science Assembly. He agreed, albeit reluctantly. The last time someone had asked to study his brain, he ended up with 20 electrodes on his scalp and a mild allergic reaction to alien adhesive gel. The evaluation took place in a sterile chamber resembling a hospital operating room. Zelth and 5 other Calaxy stood behind a transparent wall. A human psychologist named Dr. Karen Veles, brought aboard as part of the Earth delegation, sat beside him. "You sure about this?" she asked as 2 Calaxy technicians adjusted the sensors on his temples. "They're not gonna zap me, right? Not unless you start singing show tunes." "In that case, I'll do it myself." Marshall chuckled. "See, stress joke." "Exactly," Karen said. "They need to see how automatic it is." The test began with mild discomfort, a series of flashing lights and distorted sounds meant to simulate sensory overload. Marshall tensed but stayed composed. Then came a sequence of increasingly stressful simulations. A simulated fire in a sealed cabin, a sudden drop in oxygen levels, a fake message that a loved one back home had been in an accident. Each time Marshall laughed, not explosively, not with joy, but with short, involuntary bursts that seemed to rise from his chest like a hiccup of disbelief. Zelth noted every data point. After the session, he approached Marshall directly. Your laughter was consistent across all stress-inducing simulations. Yup. Told you? And each time your physiological responses stabilized more quickly than expected. Well, yeah, that's the trick. It fools your brain into thinking you've got control. Sometimes you just need a second before the panic hits. This is not a flaw, no. It's a survival trick. Zelth was silent for several seconds. Then, we must test this in real conditions. Define real. Because if you mean spacewalks during meteor showers, I'm gonna need hazard pay. Zelth didn't respond. 2 weeks later, that's exactly what happened. The Yanari was rerouted to intercept a derelict mining vessel orbiting Neptune. The ship had gone dark after a collision with debris, and the Kalaxy wanted to study it. They asked for a human technician's help. Marshall, still recovering from his elbow fracture but medically cleared, was volunteered. Karen wasn't happy. You just finished PT. You can't even lift a toolbox without wincing. I'll be fine. You're not invincible, Marshall, I know. That's why I laugh. The boarding mission began uneventfully. Marshall, Zelth, and another Kalaxy named Viren docked with the derelict and entered through a blown-out hatch. The place was a tomb, frozen control panels, floating debris, and long, silent alarms. Lights flickered like dying fireflies. Then the second hull breach happened. A secondary chamber, weakened by the original collision, gave way under the pressure of their movement. An entire section of the corridor collapsed inward, trapping Viren in a tangle of piping and severed cabling. Marshall was thrown hard against a bulkhead, wrenching his shoulder. His suit absorbed most of the impact, but he yelled out as pain shot through his arm. Viren is pinned, Zelth said, scanning the debris. Marshall groaned, tried to move, and laughed a short, bitter sound. Zelth looked over. You are injured, probably dislocated. Give me a second. You are laughing again. Yeah, well, it hurts. He crawled toward Viren, one arm limp, fumbling for the emergency cutter with his good hand. Each movement made him hiss through clenched teeth, but he kept going. The beam of the cutter sliced through the piping. Viren's leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. Pulse is weak, Zelth said. We must extract immediately. Marshall looked at the collapsed corridor. We're not getting out that way. There is no alternative route. Then we make one. He pointed to the panel near the wall. There's an unused maintenance conduit. If I can reroute power and depressurize that section, we crawl through. Your laughter is increasing. Yeah. That's the only thing keeping me from passing out. Zelth didn't argue. They got Viren out. Marshall's shoulder was indeed dislocated, and he passed out during decompression. Recovery took 5 weeks. The frostbite on his fingers healed completely. The shoulder took longer, requiring surgery and rehab. During that time, the Kalaxy updated their species-wide medical AI to include laughter response as a potential indicator of human stress regulation. Zelth visited him once during recovery. Marshall was doing resistance exercises with a rubber band. You risked injury to save Viren. Yeah, that's what we do. You were in pain, yet continued to emit laughter. Marshall nodded. Like I said, survival trick. Zelth stared at him for a long time. I believe I understand now. Good, Marshall said. Because if you ever see me laugh like that again, you better start running. Zelth made no sound, but the way its shoulders shifted suggested something close to amusement. Over the next several months, Kalaxy scientists conducted more interviews with human delegates. They watched news footage of firefighters laughing after pulling survivors from rubble, surgeons chuckling as they removed impossible objects from patients, astronauts giggling in zero-G chaos. Each time they saw the same pattern, laughter not as amusement but as armor. In the final report submitted to both the Earth and Galaxy Councils, Zelth wrote, "The human response termed laughter under duress is not malfunction or denial. It is a neurological adaptation, a form of emotional equilibrium that allows continued function amid chaos. It is, in essence, their mind's way of refusing to surrender." Marshall read that line later and smiled. "See," he told Karen. "Told you we weren't crazy." She raised an eyebrow. "Did you laugh when you popped your shoulder?" "I think I blacked out first." "Progress," she said. Marshall leaned back in the med bay chair, still sore but healing. Outside, the Yanari continued its orbit, quiet and vast. For the first time, laughter had crossed species and been understood not as foolishness, but as fortitude. The first sign that something was wrong with the atmospheric processor was the way the plant samples curled. Zelth stood beside Marshall in the hydroponics chamber, both of them watching a row of vine-like growths wither at the tips, their green fading to a dull gray. The Galaxy attendant, a younger researcher named Aiel, tapped into the environmental logs with almost frantic precision. "These specimens are exhibiting acute respiratory membrane collapse," Aiel said, tentacles twitching near its data console. Marshall leaned forward, squinting at the sensor readouts. "That's not decay, that's suffocation." Zelth gestured toward the central filtration unit. "Gas exchange imbalance, possibly. Could be an accumulation of inert byproduct or a clogged flow duct." Marshall stepped back and glanced at the ceiling. "How fast do these plants normally react to changes?" "Approximately 12 standard minutes," Aiel replied. "These began collapsing 24 minutes ago. Then we're already behind." He grabbed a wall-mounted supply kit and pulled out a palm-sized scanner. It was a human device, slightly incompatible with Galaxy tech, but he'd gotten used to translating on the fly. With his dominant hand still recovering, he fumbled a few times before getting a clear reading. CO2 levels are spiking. Oxygen saturation's dropped by nearly 20%. That's a big swing for a sealed chamber. Aiel rotated its upper body toward Zelth. "This unit was calibrated 216 hours ago." Marshall let out a low whistle. "You guys calibrate every 9 days, Aiel's stalks twitched. "Is that insufficient for a system running this hot?" "Yeah. Plants this dense generate waste gases faster than a standard filter can handle. You need more frequent turnover." Zelth stepped forward. "You are suggesting a design flaw." "I'm suggesting your air filters don't know what to do with Earth-adapted chloroflora. They're expecting clean exhale. Our plants belch contaminants like teenagers on chilly night." Aiel blinked once. "This is not mentioned in your botanical briefings." Marshall grinned. "Yeah, we tend to underreport our messier habits." Aiel looked genuinely distressed. "Several of these cultivars are part of the diplomatic exchange. They're gonna keep dying unless we reroute airflow and manually scrub the ducts." He paused, reading the chamber's layout. "Where's your vent access?" Zelth gestured toward a sealed panel near the floor. "There. Great. I'll need someone small, flexible, and immune to claustrophobia." "I will summon a maintenance drone," Aiel offered. "Won't work. Drones don't have the dexterity to clear soft build-up. I'll go." "You are not fully healed," Zelth said. Marshall shrugged with his good shoulder. "I can still squeeze through a vent and scrub a filter. Your other arm remains impaired, which just means I'll be slower, not useless." Zelth hesitated. "This is inadvisable. You want your plants breathing or not?" Aiel reluctantly opened the panel. The duct was barely wider than a torso. Marshall slipped in face first, dragging a utility pack behind him. The duct walls were warm and faintly sticky, coated with a film of organic discharge that smelled faintly like warm spinach and burnt plastic. "I am detecting volatile compounds," Aiel said from outside. "Yeah, it's ripe in here," Marshall called back. "The filters are probably clogged with biofilm." He wriggled forward, using knees and elbows. Halfway in, something squelched under his palm. He froze. "Marshall." Zelth's voice remained steady, but the undertone was taut. "Just stepped in something I really wish I hadn't. Do you require extraction?" "Nope. Just a change of socks and maybe a mild antibiotic when we're done." The first filter was jammed nearly solid. A mat of fibrous fluff had fused with the mesh, reducing airflow to a trickle. Marshall pulled out a scraper and began peeling it away. The movement sent dust motes spiraling upward. His breath hitched. "Marshall, your vitals are spiking," Aiel reported. "Yeah, just got a lungful of whatever this is. Smells like gym towels left in a sauna." "You are laughing again," Zelth noted, not laughing, wheezing with style. He cleared the first filter, then pushed toward the second junction. The duct narrowed. His shoulder throbbed with every movement. Sweat dripped down the side of his face, pooling at his jaw. He kept moving. "Filter 2's worse," he said after a moment. "Looks like mold colonies got in." "Is that dangerous to you?" Zelth asked. "I'm not allergic, but I wouldn't lick it." "Why would you, figure of speech?" He scraped the mold away, each stroke sending a fresh puff of spores into the air. His eyes watered. He blinked furiously and kept going. 10 minutes later, the airflow readings began to normalize. Aiel's console pinged with stabilizing oxygen levels. The plants were already beginning to uncurl. Marshall backed out of the duct slowly, emerging coated in grime and mucus-like residue. He looked up at Zelth, grinned through the muck, and coughed. "Your response again is laughter," Zelth said. "I'm covered in alien mold, breathing like a pug, and my shoulders on fire. What else am I gonna do?" Aiel passed him a sterile cloth. "Your resilience is statistically inconsistent with your biological vulnerabilities. Thanks." I think. Later that evening, Marshall lay on a medical cot as a human nurse flushed his eyes with saline and wrapped his shoulder in a cold compress. "You've got spores in your ears," she muttered. "I was going for full immersion. You know you're not cleared for confined spaces yet. Didn't exactly have time to form a committee." She paused. "You really okay?" Shoulders angry, lungs are annoyed, pride's intact, I'll live. Outside the infirmary, Zelth waited. When Marshall emerged in fresh clothes, still damp from a decontamination rinse, Zelth fell into step beside him. "You endangered yourself again." "I got the plants breathing. You could have assigned the task." Marshall looked sideways at him. "And if I had, would your crew have known what to look for?" Zelth didn't answer. They walked in silence for a few meters. Then Zelth said, "Your behavior suggests a prioritization of outcome over self-preservation. Welcome to Earth culture." Zelth considered this. "Have you ever experienced a situation in which your laughter proved harmful?" Marshall scratched his temple. "During a funeral once. Nerves got the better of me. My aunt almost disowned me." "I do not understand. You're not supposed to laugh when someone's died." "But grief and stress run on the same tracks. Sometimes the wires cross." Zelth processed this. "Your species has emotional interference. Sometimes it's a blessing, sometimes it gets you punched." They turned a corner and entered the viewing deck. Below, Ceres rotated slowly, its surface peppered with mining stations and glinting solar arrays. Zelth stood with his arms folded. "There is a proposal under review to incorporate human psychological training in high-stress operations." "Like what?" "Teaching Kalaxy personnel how to simulate your emotional regulation patterns." Marshall raised both eyebrows. "Wait, you want to teach Kalaxy to laugh under stress? To mimic the neurological pathway, yes. That's ambitious." Zelth turned to him. "You are not opposed?" "No, I just hope you're ready for the weirdest morale training sessions of your lives." Zelth didn't blink. "We have begun research into tickling reflexes." Marshall stared at him. "I take everything back, you're not ready." Zelth tilted his head. "Was that laughter genuine or defensive?" "Both," Marshall said. "And for the record, I am absolutely not volunteering for that experiment." The corridor outside the infirmary had the hushed stillness of a place recently cleaned too thoroughly, as if trying to forget something unpleasant had occurred. Marshall's right arm hung in a sling, shoulder immobilized with a firm brace that dug into his collarbone every time he shifted. He walked slower than usual, partly from the bruised ribs, partly because the medical wrap around his chest made anything brisk feel like his lungs were in a vice. Zelth was already waiting near the observation dome, gazing at the pale arcs of Saturn's rings. The Kalaxi's posture had changed subtly over the past few weeks, less rigid, more reactive. The shoulders no longer stayed locked in place, and sometimes the lower limbs shifted with what could be interpreted as unease, or curiosity, or both. "You've been standing there long enough to fog the glass," Marshall said, settling onto the bench nearby. "Not that I blame you." "Hard to beat a view like that." Zelth didn't turn. "I am analyzing light scatter through particulate ice. You know, you could just say it looks nice. That would be inaccurate." Marshall leaned back with a quiet sigh. "Fair." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't demand filling. Marshall's left hand absently rubbed at the fabric loop of the sling, fingers twitching in small, unconscious patterns. "You haven't asked how the follow-up went," Zelth said without looking at him. "I figured if something was wrong, someone would have burst in with a defibrillator by now. There are no critical findings, however your pulmonary function remains compromised. Yeah, the mold didn't exactly do wonders for my sinuses either." Zelth turned finally. "You continue to minimize your condition." "I'm not minimizing, I just know the difference between Hertz and hospital. I'm in the first camp. Your species' threshold for distress confounds even our trauma specialists. You should see us with hangovers." Zelth blinked slowly. "We have no cultural equivalent. Count yourselves lucky." Marshall shifted again, biting back a wince. The bench had no give, and the brace was cutting into a nerve below his neck. He adjusted the angle of his shoulder, trying to find a position that didn't feel like being jabbed with a dinner fork. Zelth noticed. "You should be resting. I've been horizontal for 2 days straight, my back's staging a coup. You could request analgesics." "I did." "Didn't like the floaty feeling. Makes me forget what I'm doing mid-sentence. You prefer discomfort to disorientation." "Yeah, at least with pain I know where I am." They watched the rings swirl beyond the observation dome, the light reflecting off the ship's hull in fractured halos. The moment stretched without pressure. "You've been quiet," Marshall said eventually. "That usually means you're debating something." Zelth raised a hand, fingers twitching slightly. "There is concern among the crew about the plants." "No, about you," Marshall blinked. "Me." "What I do now. Several crew members believe your actions exhibit signs of instability." "Well, that's not a first. They believe your tendency to joke during duress indicates a failure to process risk." Marshall gave a short laugh, then caught himself. "Sorry." "Reflex. That is precisely the issue under discussion." He sat forward carefully, resting his good arm on his knee. "Okay, let's break this down. They think I'm unstable because I make jokes while doing things that could get me killed." "Yes. But they would have died in that duct if nobody cleared it, possibly." "Then what exactly is the problem?" "They do not understand how you reconcile levity with consequence." Marshall rubbed his face, then let his hand drop. "You ever seen someone freeze? Not in a cold sense, I mean mentally, like their brain just refuses to move forward." "Yes." "Well, laughter breaks that, not just for me, for anyone watching. You laugh, they breathe, they move. It's not about being flippant. It's about traction." Zelth didn't respond immediately. At last, "The concept of emotional traction is unfamiliar." "Right, because you don't slip the same way we do." Zelth turned back toward the dome. "You accept that your methods are alarming to others." "Sure, but they work. And I don't expect anyone else to copy them." "That is not entirely accurate," Marshall exhaled. "You ran the simulation, didn't you?" "Yes." "And, out of 20 participants, 4 experienced complete disassociation when forced to simulate humor under stress. 2 developed temporary speech irregularities. 1 attempted to replicate human-style comedy and became nonverbal for 3 hours. That's about what I expected. You did not mention the cognitive dissonance it creates." I didn't think you'd actually try to systemize it. Zelth folded his arms. Our goal was integration. Well, maybe this one doesn't integrate, maybe it's not meant to. And yet it allows you to perform in circumstances that would paralyze others. What can I say? We're weird little meatbags. Zelth paused. Perhaps we should study not the laughter itself, but the underlying tolerance for uncertainty. That's the real trick, Marshall said. We never know what's coming next, we just assume we'll figure it out when it lands on us. Zelth looked at him. That is not logical. Nope. But it's very human. A soft chime sounded from the comm panel near the doorway. Zelth tapped it. Dinner rotation has begun, the system announced in 3 languages. Zelth stood. Will you attend? Yeah. Just don't make me reach for anything with my right hand. They walked slowly toward the mess hall, Marshall's limp barely noticeable now. The corridor buzzed faintly with the evening shift changing over. They passed a group of Kalaxy technicians reviewing data on a portable console. One of them looked up and nodded to Marshall in acknowledgement, not of status, but of action. Inside the mess, the tables were half full. The lighting had been adjusted to resemble a golden dusk, part of the new efforts to make human circadian rhythms less erratic. Marshall selected a tray and loaded a bowl with something that vaguely resembled curry, though the color defied categorization. Zelth sat across from him, choosing a tray of nutrient blocks and a small dish of crushed minerals. Neither spoke for a while. The background noise rolled around them, utensils clinking, chairs scraping, soft murmurs in multiple languages. You know, Marshall said eventually, you could just say it. Zelth tilted his head. Say what? That you're not worried anymore. I am not certain I understand. You've been watching me like I'm going to implode, but now you're just eating nutrient cubes across from me. Zelth considered this. You are correct. Observation has shifted to coexistence. Marshall grinned, then winced as his ribs protested. Progress. The conversation drifted to other things: crew rotations, upcoming maintenance windows, the absurd texture of the new protein supplement. They finished eating without ceremony. As they exited into the corridor, Zelth paused. Your previous actions remain controversial, Marshall nodded. They always are. But the hydroponics team has requested your involvement in their redesign. He stopped. Seriously? They believe your insight into cross-species environmental stressors has value. No one's ever said my mold allergy had value before. Zelth inclined his head. Then it is time someone did. They continued toward their quarters, the artificial night cycle dimming around them. The ship hummed quietly, just another sound in the background of cooperation. Just before they reached the junction, Zelth said, Marshall? Yeah, I do not know if I can laugh, but I now understand why you must. That's more than enough. They parted without ceremony. No lingering glances, no dramatic music. Just 2 beings moving forward, each still shaped by their own biology but no longer baffled by one another. For the first time aboard the Yanari, there were no misunderstandings left to explain.